everybody, and away we go with another edition of the Stampede Wrestling Show.
I'd just like to say it's a real honor and a thrill for me to have the legendary Dick Mask Destroyer Byers on the show tonight. I'm told that Mike Lano and Tom Andrews and a few other cronies of yours will be on here from as far back when I was a little kid. I remember Dick Byers was a legend. And
when you were a little kid?
Yeah, and I remember my dad was endeavoring to get Dick up to wrestle up here many a time, and back in the 60s and 70s. They tell me, Dick, you went to Syracuse. That was a legendary university for running backs back in that era with Jimmy Brown and I think Ernie Davis and Floyd Little and some of those guys. So
yeah, Jim Nance.
Jim Nance, and yeah, he was a pretty good amateur wrestler too. And
yes, he was.
Was that Ben Schwartzwalder or was
that was Ben Schwartzwalder? Yeah.
I remember hearing
he started me. I got started in pro wrestling in a pinochle room. We're playing pinochle, and the captain of the wrestling team, who was in the fraternity house I was in, came back from practice, and he said, "Boy, we had a bad practice today." He says, "Our heavyweight blew his knee out." I says, "Well, who's going to be your heavyweight?" "You are." And he looked right at me. They spread the chairs around in the fraternity house, and on the rug, they taught me what a down position was, an up position was, referee position. That's how I got into wrestling.
You had a pretty good pedigree, from what my dad told me. You had a pretty good amateur grounding, and you had a lot of the guys you worked with were among the most legendary shooters, amateur guys in the history of the business. Some of the guys like Danny Hodge and some of the Luther Lindsay and I think old Abe Jacobs and some of those guys. Billy Robinson and Mad Dog and Byrne and Billy Robinson, guys like that. Those guys within the wrestling.
I go back a little further than that. I had Big Bill Miller. He wrestled at Ohio State.
Was Ruffy Silverstein around that time too? Or?
Yeah, he was. I wrestled him
had
in the gym.
Fondness for those old shooters. He had most of those guys up here. A few of the old crowbars like Rube Wright and some of those old throwbacks. The Gordiankos and the Butch Lebbys and some of them. But
tell me about the dungeon.
Yeah, it's funny. My dad, as I was saying before, he was endeavoring to get you up here. I remember my dad knew a big football player from Saskatchewan named Al Benesick.
Oh yeah, I coached him at Syracuse.
Yeah, and he was always dropping your name. He always told my dad he was an all-pro up here. He was like Hall of Fame line. He was like a lineman, big 260. Does
he still live up there?
I think he was out in Saskatchewan. That was where he was from. And my dad, he seemed to have some. My dad always had a bit of a penchant for these football players. My dad had started a whole bunch of them, like Wilbur Snyder and Kaniski and some of those guys. And my dad later on had Billy Graham and some of those George Wells and some of those guys, and he spoke very reverentially of you, Al Benesick, and he was down in the dungeon more than a few times. That was sort of my dad's. My dad had a few of those old pistols. You probably know some of them, Luther Lindsay and Gordienko, and I think Oldie Olson and that Gordon Nelson from Winnipeg. They were those guys were all sort of regulars down in the dungeon, and it seemed to be like big game hunting down there. The guys that they seemed to enjoy getting down there the most were the big muscle heads, the bodybuilders, and some of the football players. So I remember when Wayne Coleman was down there, he was kind of like a big game. And he got the hell stretched out of him more than a few times. And I think my dad and those old shooters used to get a little bit of vicarious satisfaction out of taking these big power lifters and guys like Billy Graham and Bill Kazmaier and some of them, and getting them to squeak, as my dad used to say. And
I got another football player for you. They just honored him in Hamilton.
Oh, Big Angie, eh?
Yeah, Angelo, Angie.
It's funny, he was down there right around the same time as Billy Graham. Billy Graham I think he got kicked off the Stampeders for some kind of violating curfew or something like that. And he showed up right around the same time as Angelo, Angelo was still playing at that time for Hamilton, but he was most of those guys didn't make enough money playing football, so they had to have a second job in the off season, including Angelo. And I think my dad started him and Billy Graham right around the same time. And I think Angelo he was originally, if I'm not mistaken, from Notre Dame, or he played down there a bit. And
oh yeah, he played at Notre Dame, and there was a time when Notre Dame had a chance, or Syracuse had a chance to play Notre Dame in the Rose Bowl. And at that time, Eastern schools never played in the Rose Bowl. But we had an opportunity to go. It fell through anyway. But I heard that Angelo had some form of dementia or Parkinson's disease.
Yeah, somebody told me he had a little bit of Alzheimer's, or I didn't know. That was just a couple of days ago on TV. They had something on him, and he looked to me pretty good. I think he spoke for a short while, and he sounded coherent. I didn't know whether it was just in the early stages or what. But
I don't know if it was in the early stages either. But I was. When they introduced him to come into the arena where we were having this function, we hugged each other, and he said, "Nice to see you, Dick." So he knew who I was, and that made me feel good.
He was a character. You probably some of the names you mentioned there, Dick, were some legendary guys that came from your neck of the woods, back in Ohio and upstate New York and those areas. Like Bill Miller was another one, and most of those guys, my dad used to have sort of a special spot for the guys who actually could wrestle. That was kind of more of a part of the way it was back in those days.
I think possibly, maybe I didn't want to come to your area. I'd be caught in a jungle.
Oh yeah, you probably remember, Dick. I remember my dad told me when he was breaking in and back in the 50s and 40s and all like that, there was, he said in almost every territory there was the three-headed dog at the gates of hell, like a shooter. And he told me, like, when he was in Minneapolis, there was a few of these old pistols, like Joe Pazendak and Butch Levy, and he said if you went down to California, they had some of these old crowbars like Rube Wright, and if you were in Columbus with Al Haft and them, you had like Ruffy Silverstein and Bill Miller and some of those guys. And my dad told me he went to New York in the 40s with old Toots Mont, and Toots was kind of an old crowbar himself, but he said there was Tragus and a few of these old guys, and it was part of the initiation or paying your dues to get in. But I'm told Bob's got a guest coming on here now, Dick, so I'll let Bob introduce him and we'll continue.
Tom Andrew, one of the greats in wrestling, a good friend of Dick's and mine from Cauliflower Rally Club.
Is that my old buddy Tom Andrews from the Jungle Jim Star and Cowboy Kirk and all that bunch?
Yeah, Bruce?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on, Tom. I'm delighted that you could join us. And as I've told many people, when I was just a young kind of a punk way back when, I remember you were up working for my dad, and you always did a great job in the ring. But I remember you were always one of the nicest guys And I made a great impression on me when I was a young upstart kicking the tires around the wrestling business way back when and when I was a teenager. But, it's nice to have a guy that everyone holds in high regard and respects a lot like you on here. So a lot of the wrestling fans don't know that Tom was a legendary masked wrestler himself back in, was that Kansas City and some of those places, Tom?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I've been able to get to know Bill White, since I've been going out to the Cauliflower Alley Club. I didn't know him before. And he and I we have kind of a similar experience of wrestling in San Francisco, which back in the 60s was a real good territory, after I left Calgary.
Yeah,
and
that was, Roy Shires was in there at that time, or that was after post Joe Malkowick's days, or?
No, Professor Roy Shire.
Roy was in there at that time. He'd sort of.
Yeah, and I had left Calgary to go to Los Angeles, and they got extra wrestlers in there to wrestle for a while to go to Japan, and they canceled my booking, and I went, my family lived in Santa Rosa, California. I happened to see the matches were going on, and I went over to see some friends of mine that were wrestling, and they introduced me to Roy Shire. He gave me a try, and I made such an impression on him that he hired me, and I wrestled off and on in San Francisco for quite a while. And Bill White had the same experience. He had gone in, and I guess Ray Stevens put a plug in for him, and he wrestled, and they liked the way he wrestled, and he got in the same way. Of course, he was after me, but I've got to know Bill White since I've been going out to the Cauliflower Alley Club, and he's a real fine gentleman as far as I'm concerned. Good friend.
And I'd say the same about our guest, Dick Beyer. I just had a chance to meet Dick back in, I think 2001 or something like that, around the last time my dad was at CAC. And I know my dad had always been a huge fan of Dick's, and it was a real thrill. And I think you were down there around that time, Tom, maybe around the last year that Stu was down there, and I know it meant a great deal to him. It always meant a lot to my dad to see these guys who had started up here and they had gone on to stardom somewhere else, including yourself.
Yeah, I had quite an experience up in Calgary, and I had the most respect for your father. He except the time he put the sugar hold on me when we were working out.
It was kind of you're nobody till somebody loves you, so it was sort of Stu's way of, kind of showing his love, but yeah, I remember you guys had a real good group of guys. I think you guys maybe had come up from Salt Lake City or something like that, but I remember yourself and Cowboy Bruce Kirk, I think Frank Monty and Jungle Jim Starr, and I think Sandy Barr was maybe part of that.
Yes, he was, and
Entourage
Ox Anderson.
Ox Anderson, yeah, and he had a great deal of regard for you guys. You guys are sort of a good team for him. And as I was telling Dick Byers before, my dad was always endeavoring to get Dick up here, but I think Dick was making too much money elsewhere at that time.
Yeah, I wrestled in Omaha as the Claw. I was drawing real good money in Omaha, and Dick was real hot up in Minneapolis. And of course, then he went to Japan, and had a great run over there.
How did that work, Dick? You were Dr. X in Minneapolis, but the Destroyer everywhere else. Or what was the Vern didn't want?
I'll give you the whole story real quick. I wrestled Vern Gagne in Chicago, and we had a full house, and I was then wrestling as the Destroyer out of Indianapolis. So
yes.
Bruiser and Snyder, along with Gagne and Wally Carbo, promoted Chicago. And we had a big house. And Vern, after we talked, Vern said, "Hey, why don't you come into my territory?" I says, "You never asked me." Vern said, "I don't want the Destroyer. I want a mask, but not the Destroyer." I says, "Well, why don't you want the Destroyer?" I says, "Well, everybody knows he's Dick Beyer." I says, "Well, who the hell is Dick Beyer?" And I went in there to a television show on a Saturday afternoon, and I sat in the audience with a paper bag over my head. I did that for 3 weeks, and the third week I poked some holes in my paper bag, and I jumped over the top rope and put the figure 4 on Gagne. They said, "Well, what's your name?" I says, "Just pick out anything you want." He says, "Well, how about the Doctor, Dr. X?" That's how exactly I got into Minneapolis, and he made as much money as the Destroyer, so I kept Dr. X.
What time period was that, Dick? Like late 60s, something like that?
Late 60s, early 70s.
That was a hell of a territory at that time. That was
it was a hell of a territory. We had Larry Henning and the two Vachons.
Red Bastien, was he around there then?
Yep, Red Bastien. Yep, we had a great time.
Bruiser, maybe.
Yep, Bruiser, Snyder, Reggie Lasowski. You know, I'm enjoying this conversation because you know more wrestlers than I do.
Well, I take that as a compliment. I remember my dad would always be getting calls from guys who were just finishing up somewhere or looking for a place to go, and every now and then you'd get a guy who really hit the ground running. I remember Abdullah was like that. I think you worked with him a bit, but another one was at Waldo von Erich, and he had been kind of bouncing around, and he came up here and did some incredible business. You know, it was kind of interesting back in the day. You know, guys would circulate, and they would be like you were saying, Destroyer in one place, and then they'd be Dr. X somewhere else, and it was kind of funny. A lot of those guys would have. I remember Johnny Walker was up here as Rubberman Johnny Walker, and I said, God, it's been a long time since he put the rubber on me.
Yeah, Mr. Wrestling.
Yeah, I remember he was up here. He's chaperoning the girl wrestlers for Billy Wolf or something like that, way the hell back, and he came up here and he used to do the Rubberman thing where he would do the contortion stuff and twist his way out of a hoop or some damn thing. And next thing I know, he was Mr. Wrestling, and he was all of a sudden a big star, you know. And it was kind of funny though. You'd see all these guys. I remember guys like Paul Pershman, and he became Playboy Buddy Rose, and I think old Gene Anderson was up here, and there was about a dozen of these guys who were all supposedly brothers of Jerry Graham, like Billy Graham and Crazy Luke Graham, and I remember my dad had almost all those guys up here back in the day before they ever became related to Dr. Jerry, and I was always wondering why anyone would want to be claiming to be the brother or the son or the whatever of Dr. Jerry too, you know.
Dr. Jerry Graham was in Calgary when I was up there.
Oh yeah, he was. That's what I was saying. You know, when he was up here, I'm not sure if he was on the downhill slide or if he had always been on that. But he was like drunk all the time, you know, and trouble with the law and all kind, you know, and
oh boy,
always.
You know, I don't know how authentic it was, but I saw him do some incredible things with hypnosis.
I remember we did an angle with him in a guy you probably know named Ronnie Etchison up here, and
oh yeah,
with some kind of pseudo hypnosis, and we had some fake showbiz hypnotist named Ravine up here.
Oh, yeah, I remember him.
Yeah, we had some bogus angle with, Dr. Ravine hypnotized Ronnie Etchison, and all of a sudden he had superpowers. He beat Jerry Graham in 30 seconds. I remember it was some kind of gimmick, and but yeah, it's funny. I won't digress, but I remember my dad was breaking in Wayne Coleman up here. Later became Billy Graham superstar, and I remember the first time my dad had Coleman in the dressing room. Billy Graham. He hadn't become Billy Graham at that time, and Jerry Graham staggered into the dressing room, and he was completely drunk, plastered, and I think he had messed himself. And he walked into the dressing room, and he was barely able to stagger, and I remember he addressed Coleman and said, "My name is Balls." And Coleman stood up and said, "My name is Dick. You got one." And I think Coleman shook Jerry's head and squeezed him down to his knees. And it was funny, though. About a month later, Coleman left the territory and headed for, I think, L.A. with Dr. Jerry, and had changed his name to Billy Graham, the supposed brother of Dr. Jerry. And that was kind of the start of all that. But he was one of those characters from that era, old Dr. Jerry. There was a few of them that seemed to fit that mold, the Ted Christies and the Johnny Valentines and the Sky High Lees and some of those old farts who were there's always something going on or some kind of mischief. And
Ted Christie pulled the biggest ribs I ever saw.
Oh yeah, he was I think partook in some of those infamous Mabel parties that were I'm not sure if those went on in other territories or not, but I know
I never heard of them in other territories, but I heard all about the Mabels up in Winnipeg or
Calgary or yeah.
Wait, I want to ask you two guys a question. What happened to the territories that there used to be?
When I was in San Francisco in the late 60s,
with Roy Shire.
Roy Shire told me, he says, someday all of the territories are going to be history. It's going to be one or two big outfits that have the same crew that travel all over the United States. I thought he was full of bull. I didn't believe him, and it came to pass. But he predicted that back in the 60s.
If the Dick and I were talking about football a while back, but if the NFL, in its infinite wisdom, or the NBA, decided that college football and college basketball were a threat, or they needed to get rid of them, if they had done that 20 years ago, where would the NFL or the NBA be today? Or that's the biggest threat to the survival of this business. I've long said that people never sought to know, they never wanted to know, and they still don't want to know. If you let them believe, they would be happy to, and you don't need to be going online and telling them who's winning the next pay-per-view and bullshit like that. Yeah. My dad told me as far back as Frank Gotch and Strangler Lewis and stuff, there was guys trying to expose the business, and the marks never wanted to believe, and most of those guys who were trying to do that were usually dealt with accordingly. The rationale back in the day, Tom and Dick, when you'd go down to the dungeon, it was about protecting
a lot
the
of these,
integrity of the business.
A lot of these marks that, I've had the experience before, and I'm sure Dick has. Quite a few of us old-timers had fans that weren't quite believers to try and get in the ring, and they didn't last very long. A lot of us, and I'm sure Dick is the same way, we knew a lot of the martial arts. You see it on TV now with MMA.
My dad said when he was breaking in back in the late 1920s, there was all these old shooters, and my dad said that except for the cage, he said that was what wrestling was like back in the day with the Strangler Lewises and the some of those old shooters back, even the Luthez and the pre-Luthez and the Dick Sheekat and some of those old Pistols, Jack Pesick's dad, and some of those old farts. And I remember my dad was telling Shamrock and Severn, this is, you guys are making out like you came up with something new, and this is not much different than wrestling before Jack Pfeffer and some of those old farts started exposing it and turning it into a farce or whatever the hell they turned it into back in the late 40s and early 50s there, but.
Right. My father, when I got to be a teenager, he broke me in with they call it an arm bar in MMA. He called it the Japanese arm strangle, and the Kimura is a double wrist lock. He taught me a lot of that stuff, so I knew it going in when I first started.
Vince should be ashamed of himself for taking the wrestling out of wrestling. It's like I think that's one of the biggest things missing. Every now and then they have a guy who can actually work or go a bit like Kurt Angle or Brock Lesnar, but more often than not, they got these guys who don't know a wrist lock from a wristwatch. I guess we've got an old friend of yours, joining us. It's great to have you on, Al. How have you been? I haven't seen you since CAC about a decade ago.
It's been a little while. The last I seen you were in excellent shape, good mental status and all that. But then again, there are other people in this world that can be a little bit different. But that's okay. Hey, Dick, have you got any good memories of Charlie Iwamoto, Mr. Moto?
Oh, God almighty, I got
in L.A.
Yeah.
I got yards and yards of him. He'd be another 2 hours on the radio. He liked to. He loved to go to Vegas. He loved gambling. He had 5 sons.
Right.
And he always wanted a daughter. And when I had my daughter in L.A., I named her Moto. And then somebody says, well, why don't you name her Mona? It won't be as harsh as Moto. I says, no, I'm going to leave him Moto. Anyway, she's Mona.
You worked a fair bit with Freddie Blassie in L.A. back in the day, or?
I was just Dick Beyer down there. And he threw me out of the ring, caught me back in, threw me again in the pole. He when I got back up, he says, "You dumb shit! You can't take those kind of bumps." So anyway, Freddie put me over in L.A. for the title. He was going back to Atlanta. Freddie and I were very close, and we worked the business.
Who was the promoter back in those days, Dick, in L.A.? Was that Mike?
Was
that before Eileen Eaton, or was that?
Well, Eileen Eaton was in the background.
I remember Hugh Nichols.
Mike LaBelle
back.
And Jules Strongbow.
Yeah, I remember old Jules, and my dad knew old Hugh Nichols. I think was one of the guys, and I'm not sure if he committed suicide or something like that back in the 50s, but my dad knew old great guy, old Gene LaBelle, but he didn't seem to be on as good terms with Mike LaBelle. I don't know what the deal was there, and then
I don't know. I don't either.
But yeah, I remember that name, Jules Strongbow. He was kind of had been around a bit, and he was pretty well respected back in the old. I think that was an NWA office, as I recall, or something like that. But
can I ask if there's a Bob Johnson listening to this show?
There is a Bob Johnson listening to the show, Dick.
Yeah,
you are okay.
I wanted to ask Dick tell wrestling fans about his being on the side of that building in Niagara Falls, scaling that building. Could you?
Yeah.
Dick, can you go into a little detail about that?
Well, my daughter, we got a golf course here. It's called Destroyer Park Golf, and it's in Akron, New York. And she went to a meeting of the Canadians, and she volunteered me to go off the building. And when she came home from the meeting, my daughter asked me, are you afraid of heights? I says, no. She says, good. You're going to go down a building. 27 floors. I went down with my son. He was protecting me with the wind because it was quite windy up there. But it was a nice view. You could see the falls. It was very nice. I was going to do it again this year, but they didn't call me, so. But it was worthwhile. It was a charity, and raised a little money, and that's what it's all about.
You're much more braver than I would ever be, and I commend you for that. When I saw you on the side of that building, 25 floors up, I said, I don't know, I can't believe. Anyway, thanks for telling us that great story.
I was going to ask you, Dick, I don't want to even digress, but I've had a lot of people ask me about your stellar career in Japan, especially your big launch with Rikidozan, a name that a lot of maybe modern fans don't even know, but he was kind of like the ultimate wrestler in Japan, and I've been told by many guys, I've been in Japan many times myself, but I remember guys like Inoki and Fujinami and Sakaguchi still speaking very reverentially and respectfully about you and Rikidozan back in the early 60s there, and you guys were widely credited with really launching the wrestling business in Japan, and it became a huge thing after that. But I was wondering if you could maybe share a few perspectives about that thing with Rikidozan and all of that. You know, I had a chance to see it on YouTube, and I was astonished just with the crowd reaction and all like that. But that was like one of the legendary feuds in wrestling history, especially in Japan, and a lot of our modern fans maybe don't even have any idea about the magnitude of that and how big it was back at that time, back in the early 60s there.
I was in L.A. I won the WWA World's title, and I was going to go to Japan and defend it against a fellow by the name of Rikidozan, who was a sumo champion, not a grand champion, but he was a sumo champion. And I went to Japan. I am still riding the crest of that occasion. 70 million people watched that match.
I remember when I was a little kid hearing about that, you know, and my dad had a big, I think he was from L.A. or something. His name was Jesse Ortega, but he wrestled under the name of the Mighty Ursus. And he was in Japan a bit, and he used to come back with these stories about Dick Beyer, the Destroyer, and Rikidozan and all like that. And it was like unbelievable. You know, he would talk about how over Rikidozan was, and unfortunately he was murdered not long after that. You guys almost single-handedly launched the wrestling revolution in Japan. You know, that was kind of the launch of that whole thing, you know, and prior to that, you know, nobody really ever heard of the Japanese wrestlers. You know, I remember my dad had a few of them back in the 50s, like Kinji and Mitsu Arakawa and some of them, but that was the real kind of birth of that whole thing, you know, and I think a lot of our modern fans don't even realize or appreciate what a huge role you played, and Rikidozan, you know, and I don't think they realize how big a star Rikidozan was, too. He's almost like a god over there, you know, and people.
Well, the thing is about Rikidozan, the Japanese people thought he was Japanese, and he was Korean.
I think they went out of their way to keep people thinking he was Japanese, not Korean, because the Korean and the Japanese don't get along that well.
I think they still do that.
You know, Baba was just kind of a rookie back then, or he was just pretty early in his career, and I think they made out like Baba was the protege or the disciple of Rikidozan, and it kind of helped launch him as a big star over there too.
Baba was my boss. I stayed there 6 years and enjoyed my stay in Japan, and I still go back. I've taken my high school swimming team that I coached. I've taken wrestlers over there, so I have a great respect. Growing up as a kid, I hated the Japanese because we were at war with them. But then I wanted to go to Japan in the worst way, and I got to go over when I won a tournament, and the tournament I won, I beat Mr. Wrestling, Tim Woods. He wrestled at Cornell, and then he went on and he wrestled at, I think, Michigan State, and he became a national champion in wrestling. I wrestled him before he became a national champion. I wrestled him in Buffalo, and I won the tournament here in Buffalo. And in order to go to Japan, you had to win an AAU tournament. And then I went to L.A., and I lost in the finals, and I didn't get to go to Japan. But I got my dream fulfilled when the promotion, I had the WWA title, and I went to Japan. Actually, it was some of the most money I ever made. And I have a great respect for all the Japanese.
I remember they all had a pretty solid amateur pedigree, and a lot of those names you mentioned, even it's remarkable how many of them had like really like Bill Miller and Mike DiBiase and Ray Gunkel and even Ricky Starr. A lot of people don't remember that Ricky Starr was actually a pretty damn good amateur. Dory Funk.
Yeah, he wrestled at Purdue.
Danny Hodge was another one, another guy that you worked with a lot, and like the Luther Lindsays and the Gordyankos and the Gordon Nelsons and guys like that. And
you got that right. I can tell you a story about Danny Hodge and I in Eugene, Oregon. Was promoted by Don Owen's brother, and he was going to referee the match. Danny Hodge and I, in the dressing room, worked a fight. We were hot at each other, and we went out and we worked a shoot. Elton Owen, Don's brother, he's refereeing the match, and he can't get over that we're shooting. It looked like it was a shoot.
I excuse me for interrupting, but I had the same experience with Elton Owen. Do you remember Johnny Costas?
Oh, yeah, the Greek, yeah.
Yes. Johnny Kostolis, I think, was his real name.
Yeah.
He, Elton Owens, promoted a little shoot between Johnny and I.
Yeah.
And we went in the ring and we wrestled, but we worked. He thought we were shooting, and to his dying day, he thought we were, it was a shoot.
I remember guys telling me that.
We went through all the amateur moves and hooked back and forth, and we put in our time and work. But to the day that he died, he thought we were shooting.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm told we have another old friend of yours on here, Bill White, coming on. So I'd like to
really,
bring
Bill?
him
I'd like
on
to
and
say hello to him.
Are you on there, Bill?
Yeah, I'm listening to this garbage.
Hi, Bill. Have you turned 83 yet?
If I'm 83, how old were you when we had our first match?
I'm not going to answer that.
I can still go a little bit if you want to book it at the next Cauliflower Alley. We can book a match. Love it.
I was going to ask you, Dick, I know back in the day there was a number of masked wrestlers that were kind of iconic and legendary, and I remember you guys, another one was an old friend of mine, Jody Hamilton, and one of the things that always impressed me is you guys always went to great lengths to protect the gimmick and the identity and all like that, and it sort of was the way of the business. And these days, it doesn't seem like that at all. And I've been backstage and guys, walking around without their masks on, and it doesn't seem to be any sense of protecting the integrity or anything like that. But what's your take on that?
The one person that wears a mask similar to myself is Mil Mascaras. I've had many matches with Mascaras. Most of them are a half shoot. I can sit down and watch our matches here at home, and I get goosebumps because of the things that we did and the wrestling of it. Today, I argue with fans, and they say, well, how did you do it in the wrestling business? I wrestled, and I was very proud of the fact that I did 39 years in the business, and I wrestled. And I wrestled most of the time, even though I was a heel, but I wrestled. And Mil Mascaras wrestled.
I was watching some of the stuff. I saw your match with Rikidozan, and it was very systematic, very real, and I think some of these kids today, I've trained a fair number of them, but I was always to tell them, using a football analogy, you need the run to set up the pass, you need the wrestling to set up the high spots or the swerve finishes or the heat or whatever. And if you haven't established the wrestling, which unfortunately is all too often the case, then nothing else goes anywhere either. And I see that, my dad used to say that the WWE has got so far out that they can't get back in. And, it's kind of like that, and they can cut promos and they do everything but wrestling, and they're still getting a push. And you're sort of saying, is there something wrong with this,
When I was in Nashville, Tennessee, Nick Gula says, tonight or this afternoon you're going on TV. He says, we're going to give you $10 if you win and 15 if you lose.
That's actually maybe good motivation.
How many times do they count you down?
I said, I see you next week.
But if you were giving advice to a wrestler getting into the business today, what would be the best advice you could give to a new guy trying to get into this business today?
Learn how to wrestle. I got in here because I learned how to wrestle. And then I went on the road and met it up with Joe Scarpella and Big Bill Miller and all the other amateurs that were in Ohio at the time. For Al Haft, there was one guy.
Early 50s?
Yeah, 1954, 55, 56.
I was impressed with how many of those legendary amateurs you worked with, like the Luther Lindsays and the Joe Scarpellos and like the Vern Gagnes and the Ruffy Silversteins and the
Ruffy Silverstein. He was in the gym and he didn't know anything about me at all, and I got the better hand of him. Then he found out that I wrestled in Syracuse and different other things.
And he was a tough little son of a bitch, from what my dad told me. He was like one of Al Haft's pit bulls,
Yeah, he was. And I did fairly well against him. And
that's I might add, for any of the listeners out there, that's a hell of a feather in your cap, because those names you're mentioning are legendary within the wrestling realm as far as shooters go. Guys like Ruffy Silverstein and Luther Lindsay and some of those Danny Hodge and those guys are among the most respected shooters or tough guys ever in our business, so that speaks volumes about Dick Byers,
There was another great guy that worked out of Al Half's territory also, went on to become a world-class mask wrestler. I'm talking about George Bolus.
Oh, yeah. Zebra Kid, yeah.
Yep.
George was a good wrestler.
He was a big, my dad said he was a bit of a bully. He
was a big guy.
A big, Zebra Kid. He worked up here more than a few times. I think he was down in the dungeon. And my dad had another big fat guy. I'm not sure if he was around. I'm sure Dick's crossed paths with him, but he was a big fat guy. He had come up here from, I think, Utica, New York, and his name was, he wrestled up here as Bob Morella, and then he became, I think it was Gino Morella, and later Gorilla Monsoon, and
right.
A lot of people,
I broke him in.
A lot of people didn't realize he was a pretty legit amateur.
Yeah, he
Gino,
was a good amateur. He was good.
My dad told me he was big enough that if he sat on you, you're maybe in trouble. My dad said he was pretty, he knew how to kind of displace his weight and all like that. But it's fun. Another one that my dad knew, and I think Dick must know, was old Dick Hutton. Was pretty.
Oh, he was very good.
Pretty legit and old great
guy.
Dick Hutton lived with. I lived at Al Half's Motel back in 54, 55. And Dick Hutton was with his wife in a trailer parked on Al Half's property. And we used to go to the gym and work out a lot together.
I remember so many of those guys from that era, you sort of took it for granted, but they all had pretty legit amateur pedigrees, way more so than today,
Don't some of these guys have to have their script written for them?
Yeah, my dad used to always say there's no paint-by-numbers manuscripts in any museum, the way it is. The rest of it's like a bunch of puppets on a string, but if you cut the strings, most of them would fall to the ground because they have no idea of what the hell to do themselves, unfortunately, but...
I look up and admire Dick Byers for not only the perseverance that he had in the ring, but also for carrying that persona that he did for so many years and investing in that mask and then believing in it and making people believe him. A small idea can mushroom into a big project if you want to let it do that. But Dick kept things at an even level and made his friends understand that they were his friends, not just numbers in a computer. And I certainly do thank Dick for that. I thank him for the contributions that he's made to Cauliflower, donating different items. I know one year he had a T-shirt that was signed by, I think, 52 or 53 people, and he asked me to auction it off, and he was looking to get maybe $75 out of it, and I think it was either 500 or 550 out of it, but the money went to a good cause, and it went to people that need help, not those that want it. And I look up to Dick for being that kind of a guy.
Well, Byers has been a friend as well as a mentor to me, both in and out of the ring. He's been a gentleman from the word go. We've traveled, quite extensively together between us. We've been to Europe together. When I would screw up, he straightened me up pretty quick. He did things for me that a lot of people would have just cast me off to the side. And but he took me under his wing and said, Bill, you're not doing this right. You need to do it this way. And as far as kayfabe goes, I believe in it. I still think that the business should have been that way. And yes, I was a masked man. I was a Scorpion in the Carolinas for almost 10 years.
Now they got a TV show, Scorpion.
I appreciate everything, Dick, not just you coming on tonight, but everything you've done for the business. Your credit to the business, and I know my dad had the utmost respect and regard for you, and I said it before, if the business had more people like Dick Byers, then it would be in a lot better shape than it is today. But I'd just like to say it's a real honor and a thrill for me, and I've been a huge fan of yours for years, and you more than lived up to every high expectation I had, so I'm really delighted and privileged that you graced us with your presence today, and anytime you ever want to come back, we'd love to have you on, and I'd just like to thank you again, and all the other guests. You guys did a great job, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
I can listen to Dick Byers for forever. I always like going to the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame and talking to him. I like especially going to the Cauliflower Alley Club and talking to him. Just a wonderful man.
You can always get you can always get an education, Bob, by listening to an old timer that's been there and done it, rather than somebody that hasn't been, that wants to make up a story.
We're going to kind of wind this up here. Thank you guys for coming on this evening.
Thanks very much, everyone. Appreciate your support, and look forward to next time. All the best. Take care, and God bless.